Welcome everybody, back again to Code and Beyond. Code and Beyond for me, the track, is a story track, and all of the speakers are storytellers. Our next speaker is our first marketplace vendor on stage. Maarten Aerts, has just won the Developer Community Champion Award, and he's going to take you into the wonderful world of design. His favorite story is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I think we can all agree that a designer, just like an alchemist, can turn something ugly into something beautiful. Please join me in welcoming Maarten on stage.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks, first of all, for coming. My name is Maarten. I work for Avisi, a company in the Netherlands. We do software development, and we're also a solution partner and app vendor. And at Avisi, I am a designer. In a small team, we build Atlas CRM. And today, we're going to talk about a question that I get asked a lot. In the keynote earlier today, you've all heard about App Week. App Week is a week where Atlassians and vendors come together to work on the ecosystem. And I've been to plenty of App Weeks, and I always get the question, how do you know if a design is good? And I thought it was a great question, so that's why it's the title of the talk for today. And I want to start with asking you all, like, who in the audience is a designer? All right, couple hands there. Yeah. That's a good question, because the next question is, despite your job title, who does design? All right, so a lot of hands. That's very good, because the people that asked me about design, they were often, the last person who asked me was a person that worked by themselves. They were a new app vendor, they were working on some really cool stuff, but it was just one person by themselves. And this situation where you don't have UX designers on board, or designers in general, you have to do a lot of things by yourself. And despite our job titles, as you all agree now, hopefully, we are all designers. And I have a couple of examples about that. All right, so my definition of design, to make this talk a bit easier, is design is about finding a solution to a problem for your users. And I have some examples about to illustrate that we are all designers. And the first one is giving directions. So last Sunday I arrived in Barcelona, and I was walking around by myself looking for a restaurant. And there was this woman on the street, and she came up to me, and she was a bit lost. She had a paper, printed out some directions from Google Maps, but no actual map. And she was looking for a certain street that her Airbnb or whatever was on. At first I thought I couldn't help her, because I don't know anything in Barcelona. But then I realized I have Google Maps and I have an internet connection, thanks to living in Europe. So I stopped her and told her, I have Google Maps, let's find it out. So I looked up her address, and I showed the map to her. I showed her that it's only a couple of blocks walking. She had to cross a park, and that would be her destination. And that got me thinking, what if this person was not a tourist, but it was like an old man, maybe a man that's like 80 years old, that didn't grow up with technology? My solution for this problem, this person was lost, would be completely different, because I could show my smartphone with Google Maps, but this person probably doesn't use Google Maps that much. So it would be way more beneficial for this person to just give step-by-step directions. And at the same time, if it was not an old person, but a 6-year-old boy, then a 6-year-old boy in Barcelona at night, I wouldn't show him a map and be like, oh yeah, it's over there, good luck with that. And also wouldn't give step-by-step directions. I would probably be asking him what's going on and if he needs any help. So depending on who this person is, my solution for the problem is different, even though the directions are the same. Another example is meetings. We all have meetings, And some meetings are really creative, where I remember a meeting where we had to come up with a new name for LSCRM, because our old name was not that good. And we took a couple of beers, we took our time, we really started to brainstorm, we started to think and shoot ideas of each other and make bad jokes. And that meeting was very different from a meeting with the same people, where half the people have to leave in 20 minutes. Because if people are in a rush and they have to go, you really have to get to the point. You cannot get creative, and you really have to prepare. So in these cases, the situation really changes our solution for a problem. And this illustrates that we all do design. We do it every day. We don't really realize it. And I think that becoming aware of design all around us is the first step towards good design. And it's also the first step towards evaluating if our design is good or not. So, one quick question for Peter. The timer is not on. I'm not sure how. All right, perfect. Well, all right, so in the next 3 hours, we're going to be talking about... Now, let's start with some elements of design. So the first one is the user, as we just saw in our example. And to get to know our user, we need to do some user research. And that sounds scary, but it's actually quite easy. It can be quite easy. And I've prepared some questions that we can ask ourselves to get to know our user. So the first question is a bit silly. Who is the user? But this really helps us, give us a start. So for example, the user could be an old man of 80 years old. The user could be a child of 6-year-old. But the user could also be a Jira admin or a support engineer or a developer. So that's a good start. Then what's the goal of the user? So for a Jira admin, for example, the goal could be to provide tooling for their team. And for a service desk engineer, perhaps they want to help their customers, or they want to, well, yeah, you name it. Next, what do they know? And this one I really like, because the knowledge of the user is really important. So think back to the old man in Barcelona who was not growing up with smartphones. That person might want a different solution to the problem based on that. And the same goes in the Atlassian ecosystem. We have admins who, Jira admins, for example, they know all these things about screens and schemes and issue schemes. I don't know anything about that. I always mess up our instance because I don't know what these things mean. And the user, on the other hand, they have a whole different set of things that they know. And that's good to realize. So next question is, what is the situation that this person is in? So for example, admins can get a request to install an app in, for example, Jira. Now, right, and after installation, usually, well, a lot of times, thank you, nice. So after installation, the admin often gets a task to configure the app. And at the same time, they might be new to the app, so that's, yeah. So if you put all of these questions together, we might have an admin that has the goal to provide tooling for the team. They, forgot. They provide tooling for the team, they get asked to install an app by the team, and now they have to configure it as well. So that's a good start. That's a good thing to realize about our user. So next, and how do you get to these? How do you answer these questions? And a good way to do it is to start talking to users. But that's always scary, and could be time-consuming depending on where you're going. But there are probably a lot of people in your company that already talk to your users every single day. For example, I do support, for example, so I'm talking to our users all the time. If you have someone in your company that talks to users all the time, they probably have a lot of knowledge about who your user is and what they're trying to do and what things they run into. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is the problem. And for the problem, we have a similar set of questions that we can ask ourselves. So first question, what is the user trying to achieve? And as we saw before, for admins, it could be trying to install and configure an app. Now, what's holding them back? And this is where the problem really sets in. So for an admin, they want to verify that your app is working after installation. But if they don't really know about the app, for example, a user asks them to install it, but they're not familiar with it, then how do they know whether it's working or not? And even if it ends up working, probably they need to do some configuration. But how do they know what they need to configure and when they're done and can move on to the next task? So that could be holding them back. Now, how are they currently solving the problem is the next question. So from our support team, we learned that admins install our app, and they kind of hope to get some guidance on how to use this app and how to configure it. If that's not there, perhaps they look at the configuration screen of Jira Confluence, or maybe in the app itself. And if they can't find that, they might go to the documentation and then end up in the support queue. Now, I made this up, of course, but that's something that your support team could be telling you. If that sounds familiar, this problem in general, little side note, then there's a talk about it tomorrow by Kelly Snow. It's about onboarding, and it could be very interesting. So we know who our users are, and we know what the problem is. Now we get to the solution. And solutions are super simple, because everyone always has a solution. Our problem, however, is that we don't know what solution is the best. That's why we want to know, how do you know if a design is good? And in our example, the support engineers have some suggestions. They talk to the users every day, so they know what's going on. So we have a solution ready. Doesn't matter what it is. We're going to use it now. So how do we go from here? We have a user, a problem, and a solution. There are three options of where we can go from here. First option is to just implement the suggestion. The second option is to do prototyping and then test whether the solution works or not. And the third one is to do more research. We're gonna, depending on the situation, either one of these three could be a good approach. And there are probably more than just these three, but we're going to focus on these for now. So the first option is implementing the suggestion. If you go to most design talks or design conferences, this would probably not be seen as the best solution, right? You have a problem and someone comes up with a suggestion, and simply implementing it doesn't sound like the best approach, especially not if you're a designer and it's expected of you to always come up with a good design. But we live in reality and we don't live in conferences. So in reality, you don't have time to pick up everything. So in this case, implementing the suggestion could be a good thing, especially if you have perhaps some analytics that show that the problem is causing some functionality not to be used, or perhaps you can track the amount of support that comes in. Could be a good idea. But we have to keep in mind it might not be the best solution or the best design. So the second option is prototyping and testing. And this option is really scary to a lot of people. It sounds like a time-consuming job, and we don't have time, we all know that. But imagine that you have a very specific problem in your app that causes a lot of people to disappear. Maybe they churn out, they go away, or they never really get to understand the product in the first place, and they never really start using it. So that's, in these cases, you might want to put in more effort and really dig into the problem. So prototyping and testing is a way for us to come up with a good solution. And we're going to look into this in a bit more detail later. But first we're going to look at option 3. So option 3 is to do more research. Sometimes you have a really big and complex problem, and you don't always have a solution. And in these cases, more research is always a good first step. And more research also sounds a bit scary, but it can be as simple as asking a couple of questions to your users. And I have a good example about this, and it's about one of our apps, Numbered Headings. Numbered Headings is a Confluence app. It's been in the marketplace for years, and it does one thing, very simply, it numbers your headings. And in the beginning, it was simple. You add some headings, and then it would do 1, 2, 3, 1.1. Not sure if this makes sense, if you haven't seen it. But it was very simple. And then we got a feature request. Someone didn't want to see 1, 2, and 3. They wanted to see Roman numbering. And we could have gone for option 1 and just implement Roman numbering and be done with it. But instead, one of my colleagues did something that was actually very smart. They asked the user, why do you want Roman numbering? And then the user replied with, hey, yeah, we make legal documents, and in some legal documents, it's either required or it's common to use Roman numbering. So basically what happened here is this person did more research to get to know the problem a bit better, simply by asking a couple of questions. They then ended up doing more research about legal documents, and it turned out that Roman numbering is only one of the things that people need. They also needed a bunch of other configuration options. And as a result, the problem got fixed better than it would have if we just implemented the first feature request and be done with it. And now we have a lot of people who write legal documents that use numbered headings. So by simply asking why, you're already doing your research. So good thing to realize is that these options don't exclude each other. So you can start by asking questions, but you can also start by implementing a suggestion and seeing where that leads you. If the problem is not solved after a while, you can still choose to do more research or to do prototyping and testing. But the only way to know for sure that the design is really good is to test it on users. So that's why we're going to look into user testing now. And user testing is really about learning about your app. You build something, and you want to learn if it works or not. Or you've designed something, you don't have to build it right away. And the first thing to realize in this case is that the user can do nothing wrong. And this is often a bit difficult for people to understand. You've written something, or you've built something, or you've designed something that the user needs to interact with. Then you ask a person to perform some actions, and the person just doesn't get it. Like there's a big green button in the middle of the screen, and you're thinking, yeah, press that button, because that's really what you have to do. You have to press the button, but you see the person, they're like all over the screen, they're looking, they don't see the button, and you're like, oh, come on. And this is where you have to realize that that user is not stupid. There's something wrong in your design, and because of that, the user doesn't get it. And I have a nice example about this that really worked well on my colleagues, and I hope it works. So who recognizes this kind of can opener? Some people? All right, I was afraid for a moment that that's only something that we have in Europe or something, I don't know. Because I've seen those fancy ones where you click in a can and we do everything automatically. So who uses it this way? Who does that? Like putting on vertically, yeah? Anyone else who's doing it differently? It's a trick question. So apparently, I showed this to my colleagues, and they were like, yeah, normal. Then I showed them the rest of the video. I stole this from YouTube somewhere. And apparently, this is the better way of opening the can. Because now you don't, like the lid doesn't fall in, you don't get sharp edges. Apparently, this is how you're supposed to use it. So, yeah, exactly. So imagine you're user testing this, and you're seeing someone, and you're like, oh, what are you doing? But yeah, there's something wrong with the design of this thing, because nobody gets it. So that was my point. So user testing in a nutshell. Basically, what user testing is about, you prepare something to test, you find test subjects, one or more, You ask them to perform a couple of actions in your whatever you are testing. You observe, you ask questions, and you try to learn, and you make notes. That's in short what user testing is all about. So the preparation. First of all, we need a test subject. And a test subject can be basically anyone. It doesn't have to be one of your users. It's good to realize, though, that this person needs to have a similar level of understanding as your user. If you're testing admin functionality on someone who's never been a Jira admin, that's not going to work. And similarly, I once tested a new functionality on our app, and it was right after Jira introduced this new look and feel. I think it was about a year ago, maybe 2 years, don't remember. So this person was an Atlassian. So I assumed that this person knew what the new look and feel would be like. But it turned out that this person had never seen it before, and they were completely confused. They had never seen it before. They were just so distracted that they couldn't complete the test. So yeah, make sure that your test subject has the same level of knowledge. I often test on our marketing department, or on our administrations department, or I test on people from different teams that don't know our product. It really depends on what I'm testing. But there's one thing that I never do, and that's to test on our team. Not for a real user test, at least. Sometimes I show them some stuff and I ask them to do things, but my team knows too much about me, and they know too much about what I'm doing. So they probably already know what they have to do, and they know the product so well that it's not fair, and it doesn't teach you anything. So make sure to never take one of your teammates as a test subject. So once we have a test subject, we need something to test. And this really depends on what you want to learn. If it's a very basic, imagine you're designing a mobile app, and you have your first ideas, and you're trying to see if your navigation works. In these cases, you can take it quite roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to go into details. And I have an example of this. So last year, I had, might be 2 years ago, I don't remember. We had two high school kids coming into our office, and they were doing a one-day internship where they get to know businesses. It was a social thing. I don't know how to translate, so I'm sorry. But basically, what they came to do, they were really bright kids, and they spent a couple of hours with our developers, then they spent a couple of hours with a different team, and then they spent an hour and a half with me. And basically what I asked them to do is, I wanted them to design a mobile app. So give them a whiteboard, some markers, and they designed several screens of that mobile app. And they were good at it. And then next, I asked them to use an iPad to make pictures of all the screens that they designed. And then I showed them Marvel app. A Marvel app is a very simple, like it's one of the solutions that you could use, but it's a very simple app that allows you to make screenshots or photos of whatever your design is. And then you can overlay buttons on top of that design, and then you can link those buttons to other screens. So they've used this app to basically make their first prototype. And within 1 hour, they had never designed anything before, not a mobile app at least. Within 1 hour, they had their own clickable prototype, and they had a bunch of screens that you can navigate through. So what this shows is that building a prototype can be super quick and super easy, depending on what you want to learn. And the most important thing here is that the quicker you can create your prototype, the more you can iterate. Because you can quickly learn something, and then you can move on and maybe change the design and test again. Because that's the whole idea, to get to a good design. Now, this works really well, as you saw with the drawings on the whiteboard. But if you want to get into more details, there are a bunch of apps that allow you to make quick mockups, like balsamic mockups. I have this example because I used it in my internship when I was still studying. and it allows you to go into more depth, into a little bit more detail, while still, it's still a bit crude, but it does the job. And this is actually the same app as the high school kids designed, but then my internship. And it was cool to see that they ended up, maybe you can see it in the pictures, I'm not entirely sure. Their design is almost the same as what I designed, except I took half a year to do it. So, yeah, so that was really cool. Then there are other options. So this is, I couldn't find too many pictures of this anymore, but this is part of what's called a paper prototype test. And it allows you to go into even more detail if you want, but you can also do it more crude. And basically what it means is that you design a number of screens and you print them out on paper. And I have another picture. And you basically put one paper on the table, you ask a user to perform an action, and when the user presses on a button, then you put the corresponding paper on the table. So this doesn't require as much effort as you would think, because you just print out your designs and you go. If you end up using this, doing something like this, you should probably take someone else with you, because it's a lot of work to find all the papers, and especially if you make the mistake of also doing like a keyword and all the small elements, that's a lot of work. Don't do that. Something I learned. All right, so we have something to test, and we have a test subject. Now we need a plan. And the plan is really simple. You want to find out what you want to learn, and once you know that, you have to write down a couple of actions for the user to perform. So for example, on this one, well, you can see it, no, never mind. Basically, one action was, can you find your invoices? And then the user would press and look for through the menus until they find their invoices. So write a couple of those down and leave some space to make notes and comments, and then you have a plan. It can be that simple. So then you come to the actual user testing. First of all, you need to explain to the user that nothing can go wrong. Like, as we've learned before, they're not stupid when they make a mistake. And some people will apologize when they do something wrong. We just have to reassure them that that's actually something that you learn from. And they need to realize that you are testing the app and you're not testing them. It's not a test of how, if they're smart or not. It's really, you're trying to learn about your app. Then you need to prepare them for the situation. What's the app about, or what information do they need to know? And then you give them one instruction at a time, such as, can you find the invoices? Or can you create an issue from our app? Stuff like that. While they are performing these actions, you don't want to point them out to what they have to do. And this is really difficult, because you see that big green button in the middle of the screen, or you see them use the can opener wrong, and you just need to stay calm and observe and see what happens. And it's always good to ask questions, because you want to know what's going on in their minds. But you don't want to point out what they're doing, unless what they have to do, unless they get stuck. Because people will get stuck, especially if it's a prototype and you didn't think of all the options yet. When someone is stuck for a little while, you help them out, because it's not fun for anyone to look at someone struggle for 5 minutes and won't teach you anything. Yeah, and stay calm. Yeah, that's basically it. And then the most important thing is to be curious and to learn. It's a good practice, for example, to ask the user to think out loud when they see a screen. What do you think happens when you click a button? Or when they click a button and something unexpected happens, ask them, what did you expect when you click that button? Because if you think back about the example with the invoices, some people will look in their account, for example, or in the settings, because that's what they're used to. If that happens, ask them, hey, why did you go here? What were you expect to find? And your goal is really to learn why they do certain things. And while you see your person struggle with your design, you make notes, or you can record the whole thing if that's easier for you. and you stay calm. You don't get frustrated. So after the test, it's always a good practice to involve your team. This really helped for me. So after a test, I would show them what happened, like I showed them with the can opener, and that really opened everyone's eyes, and it really helped other people get involved with the whole process. And I never really make recordings, but I know that some companies make recordings and then show it to the whole team, and that really so they can see why people are struggling and really what's going on. So yeah, and then you iterate until you have a great design, and that's about it. There are a couple of things to know. It's always better to do one user test than 0. And if you don't know how many user tests you should do, I read a really good book on there's a book that I can recommend. It's called Don't Make Me Think from Steve Krug. And there's a good section about user testing. And he says that you should probably test, like if you have a lot of resources, you can test on as many people as you want. But if you're limited, test on 3 to 5 people, and you'll have the biggest problems in your design. And test early, so you save some development time. If you develop your functionality and then you test and you figure out that it was not the direction you should have gone into, you have to throw away all that work and start again. So if you test earlier, maybe with a paper prototype, you maybe can save you some time. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maarten. I think we can all agree that user design is basically the philosopher's stone for design. It can turn something lead into gold. I think we have still a couple of minutes. Do a couple of questions?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So are there any questions here? I'll come running.
Thank you. I was wondering, when you're referring to a user, who are you actually thinking about? Because I'm thinking about system administrator as a user, and there's also the end user. So I'd love to know how you actually segment your users.
That's a great question. And who the user is really depends on what part of the product you're working on, because there are often many users. So for example, if you're working on the installation flow of your app, it's probably the Jira or the admin that does the installing and then configuration. And for our product, yeah, we have a bunch of different types of users. We have support engineers, we have salespeople. But yeah, if we work on, for example, a sales functionality, we focus on that salesperson to work with that. Does that answer your question? All right, good.
What would you do if you have two contradictory suggestions? They are both interesting, but they are contradictory.
So they're both not interesting? Or?
No, they are both interesting, but one is the contrary of the other.
Right, right. So in different problems or in the same problem?
For example, I want this blue, and the other say, I want this red.
All right, all right. So so I know that at bigger companies they always have. Well, no, that's not good. So if you test this on a user, you can test it maybe the red one and the blue one and see which one works best. And maybe it doesn't make a difference. Then you can pick either one. That's my pragmatic approach. Maybe it's wrong. But if you test it on different users and you see that one works better than the other, then that's obviously the better approach.
Are there any apps or anything that you use to record all your testing at the moment, or do you just do it all by paper?
Yeah, I like to use paper. I don't like to record people. I don't have a fancy camera or anything. But at the same time, if you put a camera on people, they get a bit aware of the whole situation. So it really depends on what you want to do with that recording. Usually, when you don't, if you test only a couple of things at a time, you can remember, you can write it down, you can see what's happening. And if it's a digital product that you're testing, you can always do a screen recording, and then yeah, that should be easy. And for me, yeah, for screen recording, I use QuickTime because it's baked in my MacBook. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for those questions. The next sessions will start in 25 minutes at 3:30. Thank you very much. Enjoy the break.